Hey guys, November the 11th, 2025, and I hope everybody's been having a wonderful day so far today. It's another beautiful day here in South Carolina. Got a really pretty sky today, not a cloud, not one cloud in the sky. And I really enjoy this time of the day too, when the sun's shining right on the leaves and they get that sparkle to them when the wind blows. I just think that's such a pretty thing to see. And we got a nice little breeze blowing right now. It's just a really pretty day out here. I'm just blessed to be alive today. But what I wanted to talk about today is just the isolation of addiction. And not only the isolation of addiction while in active addiction, but the isolation that comes along with trying to get sober. And this might not relate to every single person out there, but I know for myself and for a lot of individuals, this seems to be the case. And I know for myself, this used to happen every time I would try to get sober, attempt to get sober. I would start to isolate and pull away from people. But not, like I said, it wasn't only just in trying to get sober, but there was a lot of isolation and addiction, especially towards the end of my drinking. I really started to pull away from people and just started to isolate. Like I said, I just wanted to talk about that today because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there right now who are either in active addiction and are, becoming isolated, or are trying to get sober and are starting to get isolated. And I just wanted to make a video today just to reassure you that that does go away. You will start to want to go out more and interact with people again and talk with people again and, just socialize in general. And like I said, I know for myself, it happened in both stages, really, really bad. So let's go ahead and dive into that for today. And let's just go ahead and talk about it in chronological order. There was a lot of isolation in my active addiction days. Now, I wouldn't say there was a lot of isolation in the beginning. In my 20s, my teens and 20s, I was always hanging around people. Even in my, early to mid 30s, I was still socializing a lot. And when it really, really started to get bad for me, to be honest with you guys, is when we moved here. We used to live in a neighborhood. We moved here in 2020, I believe, somewhere around there. And when we moved from our old neighborhood, we moved out here to the country. I mean, I've got one guy that lives next to me, and there's another guy that lives down the ways just a little bit, but I don't really have neighbors here like I used to. I've spoken about this in a bunch of videos, but I would go out to cut my grass or just to take the trash down to the street, and somebody would be outside, "Hey man, come over and have a beer." I mean, it happened to me all the time. I mean, almost every single day, which was one of the things when we went to move here. I told my wife that I thought that I would definitely be able to get sober when we came out here because I wouldn't have so much influence. I wouldn't have so many people that wanted to hang out with me all the time. I figured that coming out here and getting away from everybody would make things easier, and it actually didn't make anything easier. It made things a little bit more difficult, to be completely honest with you. And the thing is, too, is we moved out here, and right after we moved out here, I left my job. I couldn't do it anymore. And I thought that, running away from my job was going to fix my problems. I thought for sure that getting out of the restaurant industry, not being a chef anymore, not having all that stress any longer, was going to help me out. So I started my own business and thought, this is it. I've moved to a new place now. I've got a different job that I'm doing. I started my own business. I've gotten away from the people, the places, and the things. This should be it. And it wasn't the way things worked out. It was actually a recipe for disaster. We moved out here. Now I'm away from everybody. So I'm just, I go to work, come home, and I'm by myself. I'd get home from work and just go sit on my back porch like I did at my old house, but now I'm not hanging around with anybody. I was just left to my own devices, and my own devices were my cell phone, a pack of smokes, and a bottle of vodka. And I would just sit on the back porch and, play music, play around on my phone, listen to podcasts, and smoke cigarettes while I drank, and that's all I did. And after we moved out here, you know, like I said, I would just sit on the back porch all by myself, or the front porch. I didn't talk to anybody. There wasn't anybody to say, man, you think you've had enough to drink? Because that would happen back in the day when we lived in our old neighborhood. You know, people would check me. And I would have slowed down a little bit or tried to stay a little bit more sober, because I knew I still had hours of, you know, maybe I was at a barbecue at my next door neighbor's house, or, you know, we had something going on. We were shooting off fireworks or doing something for the kids. I knew that I had to, like, you know, bring it back a little bit and, you know, not step on the gas so hard. But once we moved out here and I was all by myself, you know, I was free to do whatever the heck I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was just drink, get drunk, and black out, pass out. And like I said, that's what happened every day. I became so isolated. And towards the end of my addiction, it was just myself and the bottle. I was barely even speaking to my wife. I didn't really speak to my children that much because, you know, they would leave to go to school. My wife would go to work. I'd go out and do my business, and then I'd come home. I got home before everybody did every day. And when I got home, I started drinking. And by the time my wife and my kids got home, I was blacked out, passed out in the bed. So I wasn't seeing anybody. And if I woke up, you know, it was 9:30 or something like that, 9 o'clock, 9:30, if I woke up from my slumber. You know, and I'd see my kids for a second, but I was so dazed and confused. I didn't even know what was even going on. And I just went, you know, when I woke up, I went right back to the bottle. You know, that's the first thing I did, was walk into the kitchen, get my cup, fill it up with ice, and mix up another drink. And I started right back over again. And, you know, my wife would be upset with me, so she didn't really want to talk to me because, you know, here it is, I'm getting drunk again. My kids were doing their own thing, maybe homework, or maybe they were in their room or something like that, but I didn't really talk to them a whole lot back then. It's really sad to think about, but, you know, once again, the isolation is real, and it happens to us. I just started pulling away from everybody. You know, let's say my mom or my dad would call. I wouldn't answer. I would be on the back porch drinking, and I would be so drunk. I was embarrassed to answer the phone because I knew I was going to be slurring my words. Or if I did pick up, who knows how I would react. You know, I used to get really emotional about stuff, or really angry about things when people would say the wrong thing, and I would flip out. I was intoxicated. Like I said, I just really started pulling away from everybody. And I thought for sure that running away from all my problems was going to solve it. And I'm going to tell you guys right now that running away doesn't solve anything. You know, I had the idea that it was going to fix all my problems, and it didn't. You know, at some point, we have to face our problems and deal with them. And, you know, running away, digging a hole and sticking your head in the sand is not going to fix a thing. At some point, we are going to have to look those problems head on. But anyway, back to the isolation. You know, I isolated so bad towards the end of my addiction. It was just me. And then, you know, I got sick. And after I got sick and went to the hospital and got out, that's when the isolation really started. Because, you know, here I am, I'm newly sober. I didn't know what to do. And just interacting with people, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to talk to people now. Sober, have a conversation with somebody, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no practice talking to people sober. You know, like I said, I tried getting sober a bunch of times in the past, but I never got past 2 weeks. That was the longest I ever got. You know, usually it'd be just a couple of days. And I was home by myself when that happened. You know, I always try to get sober on my days off, or if I was on vacation or something like that. So I wasn't around anybody during that period of time anyway, ever really. So, you know, here I am, fresh out of the hospital, just found out I had diabetes, found out I have, you know, pancreatitis. I didn't know I had cirrhosis at that point yet. I knew I had a lot of health problems, and, you know, here I was trying to navigate that. I didn't know anything about diabetes at all. You know, I'd just gotten sober. You know, I had to change my diet completely around because of my pancreatic problems and the diabetes. I'm trying to figure all this stuff out, and I'm trying to navigate life sober. I just didn't know what to do. You know, something would come up, I'd get upset. You know, I'd have these high emotions. I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't know how to function. I pulled away from everybody. I pulled away from my wife. I pulled away from my kids. I was having such a hard time functioning without the alcohol. I just didn't know what to do. I remember my wife, she wanted to take us camping. So it was like, I had been sober for like 30 days at this point, and I can't remember if my wife was doing it for my 30-day sobriety, like some kind of celebration. I don't really remember. I just remember that she rented out like a glamping site for us at the lake, and it was basically like a really big, nice canvas tent. It had like a king-size bed in there, air conditioning unit, a little kitchen with a little K-cup thing over there, refrigerator. I mean, it was a really nice tent. Lights, electricity, running water, the whole nine. And we went there and stayed in that tent, and I did not know what to do with myself. Like I said, I was maybe 30 days sober at this point, and I was so confused. Here it is, my wife paid for us to go to the lake, and that was a really big deal because we were really broke. I hadn't worked in some time. Right before I got sick, I was on a really big job, luckily, and we finished that job. My wife and my daughter came out to help me finish that job. That was in October, I'm sorry. That was the second time I got sick. But like I said, we were broke during that period of time. I hadn't worked, I wasn't doing anything. We had all these medical bills coming in and all this stuff, and, those couple $100 that my wife spent for us to go to the lake that weekend were a big, big deal. And, here I was, confused. I wouldn't say I was unappreciative, because I did. I was in a bad mood. I was just so confused. I didn't know what to do. And I'll be honest with you guys, I spent the majority of that trip laying in the bed, playing on my phone. I was scared to go outside. There were people out there drinking along the lake, because we were in a campground. And I'm looking around, I see people drinking alcohol. I just wanted to hide. And I hid inside the tent the whole time. And here I am, newly sober, with my family, on a trip at the lake. My wife's trying to celebrate. My kids are happy. I'm alive. We should be celebrating. I should be in a great mood, and I wasn't. I was pulling away from everyone, pulling away from my family, pulling away from, my mom and my dad, my brother. I pulled away from everybody. I pulled away from all of my friends. I was embarrassed, confused. I just didn't know how to function. And it was a really, really disturbing time in my life. Like I said, I just newly gotten sober, and just communicating people was so hard. People would call, and I would see the number, and I would see the person, and I would think to myself, am I ready to have a conversation with them right now? Can I deal with that right now? And I didn't know how to handle it. So I would just, hit the end button and, send them it would go straight to voicemail. I was afraid to answer the phone. People would want to come over and see me, and I would come up with some excuse, say I was busy, because I was afraid to be around people. I really, really isolated myself in the beginning of my sobriety. So it wasn't just in my addiction. It was in the sobriety as well, because I didn't know how to live life sober. So I just pulled away from everyone and isolated myself completely. And I isolated myself for quite some time. I isolated for maybe a year leading up to getting sick and getting sober, and then maybe another 6 months, 8 months of isolation until I started to feel comfortable. It might have been a little bit even longer than that, because right after that summer, that September, I was on a job doing my business, and I just didn't feel right. And I called my wife and told her, something's wrong. I don't feel good. I've got to go home. And my daughter came out there to help me finish this job. I had to leave. I had to go right that moment. And I told my daughter, finish cleaning this stuff up and meet me at the house. And I left, came straight home, felt really ill. I had no energy. I was throwing up. I just felt like I had the flu or something. My stomach was hurting really bad. I just didn't understand what was going on, and I wasn't drinking. So how could this be something related to that? So I just thought that maybe I had a stomach virus or something. And a couple days went by, and I finally went to the doctor. And on the way from the doctor's office to the emergency room, I had to tell my wife to pull over, and I threw up blood. So here I am going right back to the hospital again. And when I went to the hospital that time, like, I really almost lost my life. I got very, 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 very sick in a very short period of time. Had to be transferred to another hospital in Columbia, South Carolina, because the hospital I was at couldn't handle me. And, after I got out of the hospital that time, I had ascites. I had jaundice. I looked horrible. I was nothing but skin and bones with this humongous belly, and I had a hernia poking out of my stomach, which I still have 2 hernias on my stomach. It's just I don't have a lot of fluid in my belly right now that's pushing all that stuff out, but there's been multiple times I had a hernia that was sticking out of my stomach like this far, and I'm not even kidding, guys. Like, I looked like Pinocchio poking out of my belly. I was embarrassed. So I isolated again. I just get out of the hospital again. I lived through this again. It's by some miracle, I'm still alive. I get home, and I still don't want to talk to anybody because I was so confused with everything that was going on. I was scared, embarrassed. I would say more embarrassed than anything. And I'll be completely honest with you guys. I was embarrassed about the way I looked. I was embarrassed about the situation. I was embarrassed that I had drank myself to almost losing my life. And here I am walking around with, a belly that's literally sticking out 2 feet. It's just, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so embarrassed. I felt so guilty. I felt so ashamed that I had the opportunity to stop so many times and I didn't. So I just isolated again. And I really thought that was going to be my life forever. Just being at home by myself, not communicating with anyone, just myself and the TV, laying in the bed, maybe getting up and walking around outside and picking up some pine cones for a little bit and going to doctor's offices. I thought that was it. But then something changed, and, I started talking to people again. I started pushing myself. I just decided I didn't want to live that life and just, be stuck laying in the bed, not talking to anybody anymore. So I really tried to start talking to people again, tried communicating, hanging around people. I started going to my brother's kids' soccer games, and, I was going to my kids' soccer games, and, I'm just sitting there hanging out with those guys, and it was really uncomfortable at first, very uncomfortable. There were many days that I went, and nights that I went out there, and I sat and didn't speak to a soul. And I'm sure that I made them feel uncomfortable, but I felt so uncomfortable. I just didn't know how to function in public being sober. I had never done it before. Back in the 80s, I just didn't know how to function being sober. So, I completely pulled away from everyone. But over time, like I said, of going out and doing things again and practicing being around people and practicing life being sober, I got used to it. And, and then later on, I started this channel, and that wasn't easy either. I really had to push myself to start doing these videos. If you go back and watch the very first video that I did, I was very uncomfortable. I mean, heck, maybe the first 100 videos or so, I was uncomfortable talking about this. It was hard, but I had to push myself to do it. And, with time and getting up and doing these things and making myself, I've gotten used to speaking to people and communicating and socializing and going out to the park and going for a walk with my kids, or, going out to the park and bumping into somebody and just having a nice conversation with them. It's like the other day I was at that campground, and I was walking by these people's campsite, and I saw they had a camper on it, which none of those sites, they're all like primitive sites, really just for tents, but this was a bigger site, really level. And I walked over there and I said, hey, I just wanted to take a picture of this so I could show it to my brother because he's got a camper and he might want to come up here. And the guy said, "Oh yeah, no problem." And then I got to talking to this guy, and his wife walked out there, and they were older. They're retired. They told me they're from Alaska, and they're traveling all over the United States, and they sold their house up there in Anchorage, and now they're just traveling the U.S. in a camper with a little teeny car they're pulling behind them. But we had a really nice conversation. I stood out there talking with that guy for probably about an hour. That was something that I would not have been able to do when I first got sober, and it definitely wouldn't happen towards the end of my addiction. There's no way. I couldn't have done it. So once again, my whole point to today's video is that if you're in either one of the stages, you're in active addiction and you're really starting to isolate, pull away from people because of the guilt and the shame, and you just feel horrible about yourself because you're drinking the way that you are, or maybe you just don't want to talk to anybody at all. You're just depressed and you're just pulling away from society in general. I just wanted to talk about this today to let you know that that's not, you don't have to live that way forever. This might just be a small chapter in your life, but you can pull through it. Practice going back out, go out to the park, go to the grocery store, speak to somebody when you're in the grocery store. When you're walking through the produce aisle and you see somebody looking at apples, just walk over and say, "Those look really good." Whatever. Try to start conversations with people. Start conversations with strangers. Not everyone's going to react to you, but 1 out of 10 will. And that's great practice. It's great to get back out there and push yourself and speak to people and socialize again and just get out in the world. It breaks us out of our shell. It breaks us out of that depressive cycle that we're in. It breaks us out of the anxiety. It breaks us out of all of that stuff and gets us back living life again and just going through the process of life in general, and getting used to it, being sober, because it's not easy, but it can be done. And like I said, I wanted to talk about this today because if you're at the place where you're isolating because you're in active addiction and you're embarrassed, whatever it is, or you're isolating because you're brand new in sobriety and you just don't know how to interact with the world now, or maybe you just don't want to. Maybe you're in a bad mood and you don't feel like talking to anybody and you're just irritated in general, it eventually will go away. Just like I said, if that's the case, you just got started in sobriety. There's no reason to push it, really hard in the beginning. Give yourself a little bit of grace, a little bit of time, but, eventually get back out there. Like I said, go to the grocery store, try to strike up conversations with people. When you're at Target, try to strike up a conversation with someone. As you're walking through the parking lot, when you're at work, wherever it is, go to the park on the weekend, take your dog for a walk, maybe go to some pottery class that they're offering in your town on Saturday, or, whatever it is. Look for things that are going on in your town. Try to get back out again. I know it can be uncomfortable, but practice makes perfect, and you will get back out there again and start to socialize and interact with people. It's just the stage that you're at right now. I totally get it, and you're not alone. You're not alone in those feelings. Like I said, it will eventually go away, but you do have to practice getting back out there and speaking with people again and getting back out into the world. It took me quite some time to do it. I just didn't want to. To be completely honest with you guys, I was just in a bad mood. I was upset about the whole entire situation. I was upset that I lost my best friend. This wasn't a decision that I made on my own. I ended up in the hospital, almost lost my life, and then I was placed at a crossroads, and I had a decision to make. Yeah, I could have continued to drink. I wouldn't be here speaking with you guys right now. It was either stop drinking or continue to drink. I was right there, and I decided to go left and not drink. And that's still not a guarantee, of anything, but once again, I decided to go with not drinking, and it was not easy. It was very difficult, and I didn't like it in the beginning because I didn't know what to do with myself. But like I said, eventually I did get used to living sober, and you can get used to living sober as well. But if you're in that stage as well, where you're in just deep, deep addiction right now, whether it's alcohol or something else, and you've pulled away from everybody in your life, you're not speaking to your family anymore, you're not talking to your friends, and it's just you and the substance, and that's it. There is a way out. There is light on the other side. So many people have been right where you are right now as well. I was there. I know what that feeling feels like. I know the shame and the guilt and how bad that you feel about everything right now. But I can promise you this, that there is a way out. If I can get sober, anybody can. Not saying it's easy by any means. But if it's something that you're attempting to do, you want to do, please speak with the doctor first and just be safe, because quitting alcohol or benzodiazepines abruptly can be life-threatening. Like, seriously, it can be life-threatening. Look it up. It can cause seizures, heart attack, all kinds of stuff. Just be very careful. But once again, your life doesn't have to be like that forever. And you're not the only one that is isolating right now, if that's the case for you. I did the same thing in active addiction and when I got sober, because I just didn't know what to do. But with time, I started getting used to it. And I'll be completely honest with you guys, I'm still not fully comfortable in my life of being sober. There's still things that I have to tiptoe into. There's still things that scare me. There's still things that make me uncomfortable, because I'm like, I don't know. I used to do that all the time, and I was drinking when I did it, or, I've never done this sober before. I just don't know how I feel about it. I still deal with that to this day. Is it as much as it was in the beginning? No, absolutely not. But it still happens. I'm still learning how to live sober. And, it's been like 3.5 years. I drank my whole entire life, every single day, from the time I woke up until the time I passed out, every single day. Just those little periods when I tried to stop, that was it. That was the only time I was ever sober. But life does go on, and we can get our life back. And like I said, that's all I wanted to talk about today. So if that's where you are right now, just give it a little bit of time. Hang in there and just keep pushing forward. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. You just do not know what tomorrow might bring for you. So hang in there. There is hope. I promise you there's hope. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it. And I think that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and until tomorrow, I will see you guys then. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you guys so much. Until tomorrow,